It's just before sunrise, somewhere in Africa, around 150,000 years ago. The air is warm, alive with the buzz of insects, and you, yes, you, are already awake. You're Homo sapiens, although you have no idea what that means. You stretch, yawn, and look toward a rust-colored horizon. At no point does it occur to you, you know what would make this morning perfect? A pair of pants. In fact, if someone tried to sell you pants, you'd probably stare at them as if they'd just invented socks for trees. Because for you and for almost every human who ever lived, clothing simply wasn't part of life. It wasn't something you lacked or something you wished you had. It just didn't exist as an idea. There was no shame, no sense of missing out, and certainly no prehistoric ads for luxury cave wear. There was only your skin, the sun, and whatever challenges survival brought that day. And that's where one of humanity's greatest paradoxes begins. We are the only animal on Earth to lose most of our body hair and then spend tens of thousands of years doing almost nothing about it. So, let's become anthropological detectives. Today, humanity is obsessed with clothing. It's about much more than fashion. Clothing represents status, identity, culture, religion, and even the law. In most places on Earth, walking around naked in public is illegal. Yet for the overwhelming majority of human history, clothing was so insignificant that some of our earliest evidence for it comes not from fabrics or artwork, but from the evolution of lice. Imagine having one of humanity's greatest cultural innovations preserved by a parasite. Now let's rewind. Why didn't early humans wear clothes? Why did our ancestors continue living with bare skin after losing their thick body hair? Doesn't that seem like shutting down your umbrella business right before the rainy season? Why didn't humans go from hairless apes to fully dressed in just a few generations after enough sunburns, cold nights, and insect bites? The answer is surprisingly strange, wonderfully unexpected, and a little philosophical. It's a story about climate, biology, technology, economics, and the uniquely human ability to create meaning. It also explains why so many illustrations of our ancestors, from cartoons and school textbooks to museum displays, often get the story completely wrong. So, bring your curiosity and, for just a moment, leave your pants at the door. First, let's be honest. Losing your body hair is a strange move for a mammal. Just ask any other mammal. Nearly every large animal on the African savanna comes equipped with a built-in coat. Zebras, antelopes, lions, hyenas, giraffes, even elephants. Have you ever seen a baby elephant's fuzzy hair? Adorable, completely impractical. Even our closest relatives, chimpanzees and gorillas, remain covered in thick hair. Yet somewhere between 1 and 2 million years ago, our own ancestors began moving in a very different direction, becoming nature's version of the smooth operator. Why? The most widely accepted explanation is thermoregulation, the body's ability to control its temperature. As our ancestors gradually left the forests and became long-distance hunters and gatherers, traveling across open grasslands, thick body hair became a disadvantage. It trapped heat and made endurance activities much harder. Instead, humans evolved into nature's greatest sweating machines. Not exactly the most glamorous title, but one we still hold today. Picture that ancient landscape. The sun is blazing overhead. Shade is scarce. Every few days, people chase animals for miles across open ground, often during the hottest part of the day. While furry predators retreat into the shade to rest, humans simply keep moving. Over time, our bodies adapted. With between 2 and 4 million sweat glands, the human body became an incredibly efficient cooling system. Less body hair meant heat escaped more easily, and sweat could evaporate quickly, helping us stay cool even during long periods of physical activity. There was one major trade-off, though. Once humans lost most of their body hair, there was no going back. Evolution doesn't come with an on and off switch or seasonal regrowth. Once the fur was gone, it was gone. And when you give up millions of years of natural insulation over the course of a few thousand generations, some very interesting consequences begin to follow. This is where the story gets even stranger. After humans lost most of their body hair, they didn't immediately replace it with clothing. Think about that for a moment. If you shaved a chimpanzee today, definitely not recommended, it would suddenly lose the insulation its body depends on. But when our ancestors became mostly hairless, evolution essentially said, "Congratulations, you're on your own now." And somehow, they managed just fine. The biggest reason was simple: where they lived. For most of early human history, our ancestors lived in tropical or near-tropical environments. These regions were warm, humid, and, at the time, covered with abundant vegetation. Nights could be cool, but they were rarely freezing. During the day, the real challenge wasn't staying warm, it was staying cool. If you've ever spent time in a tropical climate and felt like the air itself was thick with humidity, you already know that wearing extra layers can be uncomfortable. In those conditions, the best way to avoid overheating is often to wear as little as possible. When temperatures did drop, humans relied on something much simpler than tailored clothing. They huddled together for warmth, slept inside caves, built basic shelters, and used animal hides as blankets or ground coverings rather than fitted garments. Need protection from the sun? Cover your skin with mud. Need relief from biting insects? Mud worked for that, too. No sewing needles or fashion designers required. Even today, some hunter-gatherer communities living in tropical regions wear very little clothing outside of cultural, ceremonial, or social traditions. That isn't because of laziness, a lack of resources, or some mysterious attachment to the past. It's because in hot, humid environments, less clothing is often the most practical choice. But the weather wasn't the only reason. Losing body hair didn't automatically trigger the invention of clothing because the technology needed to make real garments simply didn't exist yet. Let's do a quick reality check. Imagine you decide to make clothing from an animal hide. Sounds simple enough, right? Not exactly. First, you have to hunt and kill a large animal, remove the hide without tearing it apart, scrape away the fat and tissue, otherwise the hide will quickly rot. Find a way to soften and preserve it so it stays flexible instead of becoming stiff as a board. Cut it into usable pieces without metal tools. Sharp stones can help, and shaped bones work even better. Finally, tie or stitch everything together so it doesn't fall apart the first time you move. And if you're picturing sewing needles and thread, think again. The oldest known eyed needles, tools designed specifically for sewing, are only about 50,000 years old. Even making strong cord or thread requires knowledge, skill, and time. Stone scrapers, bone awls, and sharp flakes could eventually do the job, but someone had to invent those techniques first. If no one in your community had ever made clothing before, why would anyone suddenly decide to create the world's first prehistoric jacket? The leap from a mostly hairless primate to someone wearing carefully fitted animal hide clothing required an entire toolkit of inventions. For tens of thousands of years, those tools simply didn't exist. If you needed extra warmth, the best solution wasn't a coat, it was a larger fire, and maybe another person nearby to share body heat.
Here's the other part nobody talks about: shame, modesty, and all the psychological baggage we attach to nudity today are, believe it or not universal. They are cultural constructs. There's no archaeological evidence that early humans viewed modesty the way we do today. If anything, concepts of decency are younger than agriculture. Take, for example, the Hadza of Tanzania, or historical accounts of many indigenous societies in tropical regions. In places where clothing wasn't necessary, nudity was completely normal. The human body wasn't seen as a problem to solve. If anything, it was simply part of life. Modesty, as we understand it today, arrived much later with the rise of complex societies, private property, religion, and, in some cases, colder climates. In other words, pants didn't create shame. Shame came after the pants. If you could travel back to Paleolithic Africa and try to explain the idea of being dressed, you'd probably get the prehistoric version of a blank stare. Being clothed or unclothed simply wasn't a social status. There was no dress code to break. Still, people had to deal with reality. Sunburn, insect bites, and scrapes weren't minor problems, so early humans came up with the ancient version of DIY solutions. Mud baths weren't just for relaxation, they helped protect the skin from the sun, repelled insects, and sometimes even helped heal wounds by creating a primitive antiseptic barrier. Ashes from a fire could serve as both an insect repellent and a mild sunscreen. Plant sap and leaves were sometimes applied to the skin for protection, both practical and ritual. Building simple shelters from branches, leaves, and even animal hides used as coverings provided protection during the night or in bad weather. And if things got really cold, you used an animal hide as a blanket, not a jacket. You pulled it over yourself, laid it beneath you, or wrapped it around your body during a cold spell. That wasn't clothing, it was camping equipment. There's a difference. It's tempting to ask, we're not the only hairless mammals, so why didn't dolphins or elephants invent pants? Well, consider the company. Aquatic mammals don't need fur because water transfers heat differently, and they have fat for insulation. Elephants probably lost their fur in the same battle against overheating that we did. Naked mole rats? They live underground. Even pigs, surprisingly hairless for a mammal, spend most of their time in the mud. The real question isn't why didn't animals invent clothing, it's what would it take for any animal to imagine clothing as a solution to discomfort? It's a leap of self-awareness and creativity, and for humans, for an incredibly long time, that leap was simply too far.
Now, here's where the story gets interesting. We've established that for tens, maybe even hundreds of thousands of years, there's virtually no evidence of real clothing. Archaeologists search for clues, bits of hide, scraping tools, pigment-stained bones, but genuine tailored garments are almost invisible in the archaeological record. Even the earliest art, rock paintings and carvings, shows people naked or only lightly adorned. If you're playing anthropological bingo, that's a lot of empty squares. So what finally changed? Simple. The climate got colder, survival became more difficult, and one day, someone effectively became the world's first fashion designer because their toes were freezing. Between 100,000 and 70,000 years ago, Earth entered one of its familiar cycles, a harsh ice age marked by dramatic swings in climate. Africa became drier, while Europe and Asia experienced long periods of intense cold. Suddenly, being naked wasn't just uncomfortable. At higher latitudes, it could be deadly. Humans faced a choice: adapt or perish. Guess which one we chose? Necessity is the mother of invention, and humans began solving the problem in every way they could. Learning how to tan animal hides so they stayed soft and flexible. Inventing bone needles, a brilliant breakthrough, with drilled eyes for actual sewing. Twisting plant fibers into string, and weaving simple fabrics, or at least something that functioned like them. Figuring out how to cut, tie, stitch, and layer materials for maximum warmth and practicality. These innovations didn't happen overnight. They developed gradually, improved over time, and spread from group to group. But what matters is that once clothing became essential, when survival depended on it, humans adapted and engineered their way into the Paleolithic version of an outdoor gear store. Forensic genetics, thanks to lice, helps pinpoint the timeline. Body lice, which live in clothing, genetically split from head lice somewhere between about 83,000 and 170,000 years ago. No clothing, no body lice. That means humans probably didn't wear clothing consistently until sometime within that window. Ironically, the evolutionary history of lice provides some of the strongest evidence for humanity's surprisingly late adoption of clothing. Only after people started getting dressed did body lice find their perfect home. But here's another twist. Once clothing did appear, it immediately became about more than warmth. It wasn't just about staying warm or protecting yourself from insects. Once humans went through the effort of inventing clothing, they couldn't resist giving it meaning. Some bone needles found in Siberia aren't just functional. They're polished, carefully crafted, and sometimes even decorated. The earliest known threads? Some were dyed. Why? Not for warmth, but for status, identity, and ritual. As soon as clothing existed, social meaning came with it. Just as ochre markings and beads told stories about people and their place within a group, so did a particular arrangement of animal hides, a uniquely tied cord, or a longer cloak. Clothing changed from shelter into a message, from technology into art. People began expressing who they were through what they wore, much as they still do today, though not always more successfully. But don't imagine everyone started dressing the moment clothing was invented. Even after the earliest garments appeared, most people remained minimally clothed for thousands of years, especially in warmer climates. The clothing revolution was gradual, uneven, and always shaped by local conditions. If you're wondering why clothing wasn't adopted right away, all you have to do is look at the diversity that still exists today. Even in the 21st century, people around the world continue to adapt or choose not to adapt their clothing based on their environment. Until recent decades, the Yanomami of the Amazon wore very little clothing. The same was true for many Pacific Island communities, indigenous Australians, and Southeast Asian hunter-gatherer groups. The importance of clothing has always been shaped by climate, culture, outside contact, and sometimes politics. The idea that everyone, everywhere, always needed to cover up is a modern misconception. Even after clothing became possible, its adoption was slow and uneven, shaped by an ongoing balance between the environment and the needs of the people living in it.
The earliest garments were almost certainly not tight-fitting outfits. Instead, imagine rough animal hides draped over the body, fastened with cords, or hanging from the shoulders like an oversized prehistoric cape. These clothes were made for function, not fashion, though perhaps someone discovered early on that a little decorative fringe didn't hurt. At some archaeological sites, traces of plant fibers twisted into simple string or rope suggest that even before true fabric existed, humans were tying bundles, weaving slings, and carrying loads. These practical skills eventually laid the foundation for the invention of clothing. The oldest confirmed textile fragments are about 30,000 years old, plaited flax fibers discovered in a cave in the Republic of Georgia. They were even dyed, and somehow already more stylish than a few outfits I own. These textiles appeared tens of thousands of years after hide clothing began, but they reveal early experimentation in both covering and decorating the human body. At its core, the reason early humans didn't start wearing clothes right away is surprisingly simple. They weren't wired to see their bare bodies as something that needed to be covered. That idea had to be invented. Clothing isn't about what we lack, it's about what becomes possible. It's a choice, a symbol, and the result of complex cultural, technological, and psychological changes. Until those factors came together, climate, necessity, skill, status, and curiosity, humans had little reason to think about clothing at all. Even today, if you stripped away the rules, put away your phone, your mirror, and your social media, and lived in a world of sunshine, mud, and close friends, what would you really miss more? A pair of jeans, or one more day without having to do laundry? The delay in wearing clothing wasn't because early humans were unintelligent, lazy, or lacking imagination. In a way, it reflected the strength of a mind that solved problems only when they actually appeared.
It was a practical approach. Don't change what already works, don't invent something until you truly need it, and maybe even appreciate the skin you're in. Humans didn't start wearing clothes because for a very long time they simply didn't need them. When the need finally arrived, whether because of freezing weather, an injury, or even a particularly bad mosquito season, they found a solution. And then, as humans always do, they turned a simple solution into something far more complex. So why didn't early humans wear clothes? Because the idea of dress codes and unwritten rules simply never existed for them. They survived, adapted, and thrived, sometimes gracefully, sometimes imperfectly, on their own terms for tens of thousands of years. They made tools, told stories, created art, and raised families, all while wearing only what evolution had given them. Which brings us back to you. The next time you stand in front of your closet saying, "I have nothing to wear," remember this. For about 98% of human history, that was the normal way of life, and people made it work. The original human wardrobe didn't need folding, washing, or matching. It just needed a little sunshine, a few resourceful friends, and a healthy tolerance for goosebumps. And here's the best part. Everything that came afterward, the entire history of fashion, the rise of status and style, changing trends, cultural traditions, Paris runways, and everyday comfort, grew out of one uniquely human trait. We get cold, we get creative, and together we decide when it's finally time to put something on. Let me know in the comments, would you have been part of Team Naked Originals, or would you have started the prehistoric clothing trend the moment the temperature dropped below 68 degrees Fahrenheit, or 20 degrees Celsius? Either way, whatever you're wearing right now, you're part of the strange, creative, resilient, and endlessly adaptable story of humanity. Until next time.